My name is Fallon. I'm 23 years old. This story is about my mother and my older sister and how they controlled almost every part of my life. For years, I thought it was normal. I thought all families were like this. I didn't realize I had been living in a cage until I finally stepped outside of it. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about the day I stopped explaining myself. It's about the moment I realized that some people will never understand you, no matter how many times you try to make them see. And that's okay, because at some point, you have to choose yourself, even if it means walking away from the people who are supposed to love you the most. This is how I got there. Growing up, my mother and my sister Marin were inseparable. Marin is 5 years older than me, and from the time I can remember, they were always together. They had inside jokes I didn't understand. They went shopping together every weekend. They talked on the phone for hours, even when they lived in the same house. I was always there, but I was never really included. It felt like they were the family, and I was just someone who lived in the same house. I didn't think much of it back then. I assumed that's just how it was supposed to be. I told myself maybe I was too young. Maybe when I got older, things would change. But they never did. The older I got, the more I realized I wasn't part of their unit. I was just the extra. When I was younger, I didn't get to pick my own clothes. My mother would lay out my outfits every morning, and if I said I didn't like something, she'd tell me I didn't know what looked good. Marin would agree with her. When we went out to eat, they ordered for me. When I tried to say I wanted something different, my mother would say I was being difficult. So I stopped trying. It was easier to just let them decide. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every small choice they took away from me made me feel smaller. I stopped having opinions. I stopped knowing what I liked. Because every time I said what I wanted, I was told I was wrong. So I learned to be quiet. I learned to just go along with whatever they wanted. Even as I got older, nothing changed. When people asked me questions, my mother or Marin would answer for me. If someone asked what I wanted to do after high school, Marin would jump in and say I was still figuring it out. If a teacher asked how I was doing, my mother would smile and say I was fine. I stood there, silent. I learned that my voice didn't really matter, so I stopped using it. I became invisible in my own life. At family gatherings, people would ask me things, and before I could open my mouth, my mother or Marin would speak. They always had an answer ready, and everyone just accepted it. No one ever looked at me and asked why I wasn't speaking for myself. Or maybe they did notice, but they didn't think it was strange. When it came time to apply for college, I wanted to study graphic design. I loved drawing. I loved creating things. I would spend hours sketching in my notebooks. But my mother said art wasn't a real career. Marin agreed. They sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I should study business or nursing, something stable, something practical. They said I could do art as a hobby, but I needed to be realistic. I applied to the programs they chose. I got accepted. I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't know what I wanted. Maybe I was being childish. So I enrolled in a business program I had no interest in. And I spent 4 years learning things I didn't care about. After I graduated, I got a job at a local office doing data entry. It wasn't what I wanted, but it paid the bills. I started saving money. I looked at apartments online during my lunch breaks. I imagined what it would feel like to have my own space, to decorate it how I wanted, to come home and not have to explain where I'd been. One night at dinner, I mentioned I was thinking about moving out. My mother's face changed. She stopped eating and stared at me. She said I wasn't ready. She said living alone was expensive and dangerous. Marin called me selfish. She said our mother needed me at home. I felt guilty. I felt like I was doing something wrong. So I stayed. I deleted the apartment listings from my search history. I met someone at work. His name was Derek. He was polite and had a stable job in accounting. My mother loved him immediately. She invited him to family dinners every week. Maren thought he was perfect for me. They talked to him more than they talked to me. They asked him about his day, his family, his plans. I sat there, watching them bond with him. I felt strange around Derek. Something didn't feel right. He was nice, but I didn't feel anything when I was with him. I didn't feel excited or happy. I just felt neutral. But I didn't know how to explain that to anyone. So I stayed with him because they wanted me to. Because for once, I was doing something they approved of. After 6 months, I couldn't do it anymore. I broke up with Derek. I told him I didn't feel the connection. He was hurt, but he understood. He said he felt like I was never really present when we were together. And he was right. My mother did not understand. She called me ungrateful. She said I was throwing away a good man for no reason. She said no one else would want to deal with me. Maren said I was sabotaging my own happiness. She said I didn't know what I wanted and I was going to end up alone. They didn't speak to me for a week. The silence in the house was suffocating. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake. Maybe I was the problem. A few months later, I was scrolling through job listings online. I wasn't really looking for anything. I was just bored at work. Then I saw a posting for a marketing coordinator position in a city 3 hours away. The pay was better than what I was making. The work looked interesting. It was for a small company that did branding and design, something closer to what I had always wanted to do. I applied without thinking. I didn't tell anyone. 2 weeks later, they called me. They wanted to interview me. I drove to the city on a Saturday and met with the team. They offered me the job at the end of the interview. I sat in my car afterward and cried. It was the first time in years I felt something close to hope. I told my mother and Maren about the job offer that night at dinner. My mother put down her fork and stared at me. Maren looked at me like I had said something offensive. My mother said we needed to talk about this properly. She called it a family meeting. They sat across from me at the kitchen table with their arms crossed. Maren said the job was too far away. My mother said I didn't know anyone in that city. They said it was risky. They said it was selfish. They said I wasn't thinking clearly. My mother said I was running away from my problems. Maren said I couldn't handle living on my own. I sat there and listened to them list all the reasons I shouldn't go. And for the first time, I realized they didn't want what was best for me. They wanted me to stay small. They wanted me to stay close. Because if I left, they couldn't control me anymore. I accepted the job offer the next morning. I sent the email before I could change my mind. My hands were shaking as I typed. I didn't tell my mother or Maren right away. I waited until everything was official, until I had a start date and had signed the paperwork. When I finally told them, my mother's face went blank. She didn't yell. She just stood up and walked out of the room. Maren looked at me like I had betrayed her. She said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She said I would regret this. Then she left too. For 2 weeks, my mother didn't speak to me. She would walk past me in the hallway like I wasn't there. She made dinner for herself and Maren, but not for me. It hurt more than I expected, but I didn't change my mind. After I moved, the calls started. My mother called me every single day, sometimes twice a day. She would ask how I was doing, but her voice was cold. She would remind me how hard it was for her to be alone. She said Maren was busy with her own life, and now I had abandoned her too. Maren sent long text messages. She told me I had abandoned the family. She said I only thought about myself. She brought up things from years ago, times I had been difficult, times I had disappointed them. She said I was selfish for leaving. She said I didn't care about anyone but myself. I read every message. I felt the guilt sink into my chest like a stone. But I didn't go back. I couldn't go back. One Saturday morning, about a month after I moved, I heard knocking at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it, and my mother and Marin were standing there with bags in their hands. They had driven 3 hours without telling me. My mother said they wanted to see my new place. She said they brought me groceries. I let them in because I didn't know what else to do. They walked through my apartment, criticizing everything. My mother said the neighborhood didn't look safe. Marin said my furniture was cheap and depressing. Then they started rearranging things, moving my couch, changing where I put my dishes. My mother reorganized my entire kitchen. I stood there, watching them take over my space. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. I felt like a child again. After they left, I sat in my apartment for hours trying to process what had happened. That night, I called my mother. My heart was pounding. I told her I needed them to let me know before they visited. I said I appreciated them caring, but I needed some space. I needed to feel like this apartment was mine. My mother laughed. Not a happy laugh, a dismissive one. She said I was being ridiculous. She said she was my mother and she had every right to visit whenever she wanted. She said I was being ungrateful after everything she'd done for me. Marin called me an hour later. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was acting like they were strangers. I tried to explain how I felt, but she talked over me. She always talked over me. They showed up again 2 weeks later, unannounced. Again. My company had a small celebration for hitting a project milestone. We had been working on a rebrand for a local business, and it had gone really well. My boss rented out a room at a nice restaurant downtown. I was nervous, but I decided to invite my mother and Marin. I thought maybe it would help them see that I was doing well, that I was building something here. They showed up 30 minutes late. My mother was wearing a tracksuit. Marin was on her phone the entire time. During dinner, my boss mentioned a campaign I had worked on. She was praising my ideas. My mother interrupted and made a joke about how I used to be terrible at art projects as a kid. Marin laughed loudly. My coworkers smiled politely, but I could see the confusion on their faces. I wanted to disappear. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and just stared at myself in the mirror. A few weeks later, I came home from work exhausted. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to take a shower and order food. I opened my apartment door and froze. My mother and Marin were inside, sitting on my couch, going through my mail. There were envelopes scattered on my coffee table. I asked them how they got in. My mother held up a key. She said she had made a copy the last time she visited. She said she wanted to drop off some groceries and decided to wait for me. Marin was reading a letter from my bank. She looked up and asked why I was spending so much on rent when I could just move back home. I stood there staring at them. My heart was pounding. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just realized in that moment that this would never stop unless I made it stop. That night, after they left, I sat on my couch in the dark. I didn't turn on any lights. I just sat there thinking. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending myself. Tired of hoping they would understand. I realized I had spent my whole life trying to make them see me, but they didn't want to see me. They wanted me to be what they needed. A daughter who stayed close. A sister who didn't change. Someone they could shape and control. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to justify my choices. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was just going to live my life. And if they couldn't accept that, then I would accept the distance. It was the only way forward. The next day, I called a locksmith. He came that afternoon and changed all the locks on my apartment. It cost me more than I wanted to spend, but it felt necessary. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell Marin. I didn't send a text or leave a voicemail explaining why. I just did it. When the locksmith left, I locked the door behind him and tested the new key. It felt like the first real decision I had made in years. I slept better that night than I had in months. For the first time, my apartment felt like it was actually mine. No one could walk in whenever they wanted. No one could go through my things while I was at work. It was a small thing, but it changed everything. I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt relief. I felt safe. 3 days later, my phone started buzzing during a meeting at work. It was Marin. She sent me 5 texts in a row, asking why I wasn't answering. Then my mother tried to visit. I wasn't home, but I knew what happened because Marin called me immediately. She was furious. She said their key didn't work. She said I had changed the locks without telling them. She was yelling so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My mother got on the phone, and her voice was shaking. She asked me why I would do this. She said I was locking my own family out. I told her I needed privacy. She said I was treating them like criminals. She said she was my mother, and she deserved access to my home. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I just said I had to go. Then I hung up. My hands were trembling, but I didn't call back. After that, they stopped calling. They stopped texting. My phone went quiet. I assumed it was punishment. I assumed they were waiting for me to apologize and beg them to talk to me again. But I didn't. The first few days were hard. I kept checking my phone. I felt guilty. I wondered if I had gone too far. Maybe I should have just talked to them. Maybe I should have been more patient. But then something shifted. The silence that used to feel like punishment started to feel like peace. I could breathe. I could think. I could exist without constantly bracing for their judgment. I started sleeping through the night. I stopped looking over my shoulder. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was freeing. I realized I had been afraid of this silence my whole life, but now that it was here, it was exactly what I needed. I started to realize how much energy I had been using just to manage their emotions. How much of myself I had given up to keep them happy. Every conversation had been carefully calculated. Every decision had been weighed against their potential reaction. I had been living my life around them instead of for myself. And now that they weren't speaking to me, I could finally see it clearly. I could see how small I had made myself, how much I had sacrificed just to avoid conflict. It was exhausting just thinking about it. If these stories speak to you, you may want to stay for more, because what happened next changed everything. The silence didn't last forever, and when they came back, it wasn't in the way I expected. 2 months later, my cousin Jenna got married. I had RSVP'd months before everything happened. I thought about not going, but I didn't want to miss it because of them. Jenna and I had been close growing up. I drove back home for the weekend and checked into a hotel. I didn't tell my mother I was in town. At the wedding, my mother and Marin barely looked at me. They sat on the opposite side of the room during the ceremony. At the reception, they stood in a corner with my aunts. I could see them whispering. I could feel people staring at me. Some family members came up and hugged me, but they seemed uncomfortable, like they didn't know what to say. But I stayed calm. I smiled. I congratulated Jenna. I didn't let them see that it bothered me. I wasn't going to give them that. During the reception, Jenna's younger brother came up to me at the bar. He asked how my new job was going. He seemed genuinely interested. Before I could answer, Marin appeared beside us. She put her hand on his shoulder and smiled. She said I had moved away for work, but that it was a difficult transition. She made it sound like I was struggling, like I had made a mistake and was too proud to admit it. My cousin looked at me with concern. He asked if I was doing okay. I just smiled and said I was doing fine. I said I really liked my job and the city. I didn't correct her story. I didn't explain what really happened. I just let her tell whatever version she wanted to tell. Then I excused myself and walked away. A few days after the wedding, my aunt called me, the one who had always been kind to me. She said she heard I was having a hard time adjusting to my new life. She said my mother told her I wasn't handling the move well, that I was lonely and struggling with work. She offered to talk if I needed someone. I realized then that my mother and Marin had been telling people their version of my life. They were painting me as lost or troubled, as someone who had made a reckless decision and was now suffering the consequences. I thanked my aunt and told her I was actually doing really well, that I loved my job and had made good friends. But I didn't try to convince her. I didn't call other family members to defend myself. I just let them believe what they wanted to believe. The truth would show itself eventually. Over the next few months, I focused on myself. I got better at my job. My boss gave me more responsibility. I started leading my own projects. I made friends with people from work. We went out for drinks on Fridays. I joined a pottery class on weekends at a little studio downtown. I started running in the mornings before work. I decorated my apartment the way I wanted it. Plants everywhere. Art on the walls. A reading corner by the window. I cooked meals I actually liked. I watched movies my mother would have said were boring. I did things just because I wanted to. And slowly, I started to feel like a real person. Not someone's daughter. Not someone's sister. Just me. Just Fallon. I was learning who that was for the first time. Around month 4, I heard from my aunt again. She called just to chat, but she mentioned that Marin's long-term boyfriend had broken up with her. They had been together for 3 years. She said Marin was taking it really hard. She also mentioned that my mother was spending a lot of time at Marin's apartment, helping her through it, checking on her constantly. I didn't reach out to Marin. I knew what was happening. My mother didn't have me to focus on anymore. So now all of that energy, all of that control, was going to Marin. And Marin was starting to feel what I had felt for years. The constant calls, the unsolicited advice, the criticism disguised as concern. I almost felt bad for her. But I also knew she had to figure this out on her own, just like I had. One evening in early fall, my phone rang. It was Marin. I stared at the screen for a long time before I answered. I almost didn't, but something made me pick up. Her voice sounded different, tired, flat. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She said she was calling to check in. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. It was polite, surface level. She asked about work. I asked about hers. She didn't mention the breakup. She didn't mention Mom. She didn't mention anything that had happened between us. But I could hear something in her voice, something that sounded like exhaustion, like defeat. When we hung up, I sat there holding my phone. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe she was reaching out because she understood now, but another part of me knew it was probably more complicated than that. A few weeks later, Marin called again. This time she talked more. She said Mom had been calling her every day, multiple times a day, asking her what she was eating, telling her she wasn't over her ex yet, showing up at her apartment without asking, telling her how to decorate, telling her she was making bad choices. Marin said it was exhausting. She said she didn't know how to make it stop without causing a huge fight. She said she felt like she couldn't breathe. I listened. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say now you know how I felt. I didn't offer advice. I just let her talk. When she was done, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said quietly that she didn't realize how much pressure I had been under all those years. She didn't say sorry, but it was the closest she had ever come. Marin called a few more times after that. Each time, she vented about Mom, about how controlling she was, about how she couldn't make a decision without criticism, about how she felt guilty all the time. I listened, but I didn't try to fix it for her. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't give her a step-by-step plan to set boundaries. I had spent years trying to get them to understand, and it never worked. Now Marin was living it, and she had to figure it out on her own. I wasn't going to be her therapist. I wasn't going to save her from the same thing she had helped put me through. That probably sounds harsh, but I had learned that I couldn't fix other people's relationships. I could barely fix my own. Marin never apologized for what she had done, for how she had treated me, and I stopped waiting for it. 6 months after I moved, my mother had a health scare. She went to the emergency room with chest pain. It turned out to be acid reflux and anxiety. Nothing serious, but Marin called me in a panic. She said I needed to come home. She said Mom was asking for me. She said I needed to help take care of her, that she couldn't do it alone. I was at work when she called. I stepped outside and stood in the parking lot, listening to her. I told Marin I couldn't just leave work. I had a presentation the next day. Marin's voice got sharp. She said I was being selfish. She said this was our mother. She said family comes first. I took a breath. I thought about all the times I had dropped everything for them, all the times I had rearranged my life to make them happy. And then I said no. I said Marin could handle it, and I hung up. After I hung up, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. I felt guilty for about a day, maybe less. I kept thinking about my mother in the hospital. I kept imagining her asking for me and me not being there. But then I remembered all the years of control, all the times she made me feel small, all the times she dismissed my feelings and told me I was being dramatic. I reminded myself that saying no was not cruelty. It was self-preservation. My mother was fine. She had Marin. She had other family nearby. She didn't need me. She wanted me there so she could make me feel guilty, so she could remind me of my place. And I wasn't going to fall for it anymore. The guilt faded faster than I expected, and that told me I was finally healing. A few months later, Marin texted me out of nowhere. It was short. She said she had finally moved out of our mother's house. She had gotten her own apartment across town. She said it was small, but it was hers. The message felt significant, like she was telling me she understood now, like she had finally done what I had done. I texted back and said I was happy for her. I didn't ask questions. I didn't push for details. But something shifted between us after that. The texts became a little more frequent, a little warmer. We talked about normal things, work, weather, shows we were watching. We didn't talk about Mom. We didn't talk about the past. It was like we were starting over, building something new from scratch. It wasn't the relationship we used to have, but maybe that was better. About 8 months after I moved, Marin asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. She was coming to my city for a work thing. I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown on a Saturday morning. It was awkward at first. We both ordered our drinks and sat across from each other, not knowing what to say. But then we started talking about her new apartment, about my job, about the pottery class I was taking. We didn't talk about our mother. We didn't talk about what had happened between us. We just talked about our lives, about the present. It wasn't deep. It wasn't emotional. But it was civil. When we said goodbye, she hugged me. It was brief and a little stiff, but it was something. I watched her walk away and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. My mother and I still don't talk much. She calls maybe once a month. The conversations are short and polite. She asks how I am. I say I'm fine. She tells me about things happening at home. I listen. We don't talk about anything real. We don't talk about what happened. I think she still believes I'm the one who was wrong, that I abandoned her, that I chose myself over family. And maybe in her mind, that's exactly what I did. I've accepted that she might never understand. She might never see me as anything other than the daughter who left. And I'm okay with that now. I spent so many years waiting for her approval, waiting for her to see me. But I don't need that anymore. I don't need her to validate my choices. I know I made the right decision for myself. Looking back, I don't regret leaving. I don't regret changing the locks, or saying no, or choosing distance over dysfunction. I learned something important in all of this. I learned that you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing yourself. Not even family. Especially not family who made you feel guilty for having boundaries. For years, I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought it meant putting everyone else first. But that's not love. That's control. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to be small. I'm still learning who I am. I'm still figuring out what I want. But for the first time in my life, I'm doing it on my own terms. And that's enough. I'm enough. I don't need their permission anymore. I never did. Thank you for listening to my story. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you being here. Sometimes we need to hear that it's okay to choose ourselves, even when it feels impossible. Setting boundaries with family isn't easy, but it's necessary for your peace. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. I share real stories about family dynamics, toxic relationships, boundaries, and finding yourself after years of control. Stories about mothers and daughters, sisters, emotional manipulation, and quiet revenge through simply living your best life. Your support means everything and helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to choose yourself over family expectations. I read every single one. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourself.